Russia will be prepared to continue to have conversations and will make the right sort of mood music. But there is absolutely no pressure on them, really, to bring about any sort of ceasefire at the moment.
Britain has just pledged more support for Ukraine, making a commitment to spend £4.5 billion this year, the UK's highest contribution yet. Now, in total, Ukraine's allies have pledged £18 billion in new military support, following talks between 50 countries at a UK-German-led summit in Brussels this morning. The Defence Secretary John Healey gave a press conference just over an hour ago, calling for governments and defence industries to step up their support.
Now is the critical moment. A moment for our defence industries to step up, and they are. A moment for our militaries to step up, and they are. A moment for our governments to step up, and we are. And we're sending a signal to Putin, but we're also sending a message to Ukraine, and we are saying to Ukraine, we stand with you in the fight, and we will stand with you in the peace.
Now, while all of this is going on in Brussels, President Trump's diplomatic envoy, Steve Witkoff, is in Russia for talks with the Kremlin, saying he's just arrived in St. Petersburg, although they haven't confirmed whether he's meeting President Putin. Well, joining us now is the retired British Army officer, Major General Tim Cross. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I mean, it feels like because the news agenda has been so focused on tariffs, we haven't really discussed Ukraine for a while. Just give us an update on what's been happening in Ukraine and what's the kind of state of play in terms of where the battle lines are.
Yeah, you're right. Obviously, it has fallen off the news a bit. I mean, almost inevitably, really. But it may have gone quiet, with President Trump's announcements and so forth. But from a Russian point of view, it hasn't gone quiet. And certainly from a Ukrainian point of view, Russia has been pushing ahead with initially quite small advances. But nonetheless, it looks like they might be trying to put together some, rather larger counteroffensive. They have gained ground. They haven't completely retaken the Kursk salient. But I suspect, if I'm honest, that's probably going to happen in the not too distant future. So they're definitely feeling, that they are on the offensive and are making ground. They've also, of course, Ukraine has identified about 150 Chinese as well as North Koreans fighting against them. Difficult to know whether that's formal Chinese engagement or whether these are the equivalent of mercenaries or individual people that are going to fight, actually on both sides, to be fair. But the North Koreans have also gone very quiet. They took a lot of casualties in some of the initial engagements that they got involved with, and it may be that they've been pulled further back. And from a Ukrainian point of view, the attacks on their infrastructure continue, notwithstanding the 30-day peace wasn't agreed by Russia in the first place. But the agreement not to attack infrastructure and not to use military force in the Black Sea, both of those are being ignored. So it's really gone on much as it was before, but it is, in a way, not surprising. I don't think Putin is really serious about engaging in any way at the moment to bring about any sort of ceasefire.
And it's this development about these Chinese soldiers is very interesting. What do you think is going on there? And I was reading that an EU official had said, look, China could actually play a big part in helping bring this conflict to an end because it is supporting kind of Russia behind the scenes in many ways.
Yeah, it is, and it does have influence. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Our own chief of defence staff, of course, has just visited China and had military to military talks there, and I suspect that was part of those conversations. China has been providing a lot of material support, as in equipment and various other financial support, as well as buying things from Russia as well, trying to break sanctions and so on. I don't think there's any doubt that China is supportive of Russia. It is maybe holding them back a bit. I don't really get a sense of that, but particularly I would suspect in the conversations about use of nuclear weapons, which of course has emerged quite a lot over the last year or so when Putin and others have been talking about using tactical nuclear weapons. I suspect China has been putting up, giving them a word of warning on that. So as I say, I think the individuals on the battlefield, I don't think is formal Chinese policy, but it's definitely Chinese policy to stay engaged with this. And I do think that they can be quite influential.
And look, let's turn to this announcement of new money. Britain's pledging this extra money and, asking people to step up. What do you make of this?
Well, to be fair, it's a continuation, particularly of our current Defence Secretary, but also the previous ones, to say that we are standing firmly with Ukraine. And I think that's right. I mean, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that Ukraine is, from a Western perspective, is a sovereign nation that's been invaded by another nation. And we do need to try to do our best to ensure that Russia is not victorious in, however we define victory. I mean, clearly they've gained a lot of ground and so forth, but we are firmly standing with them. And the commitment is a serious one, particularly when you consider, our own defence spending needs improving, and we need to be buying and replacing a lot of equipment that we've sent to Ukraine, but also fill a lot of holes that have appeared in defence over the last decade or so. So $4.5 billion is not an insignificant amount of money. And I think John Healey and the government are serious about it. One of the questions, of course, is what's going to happen about American funding, although that is back on the table now as a result of the last 2 or 3 weeks of various conversations that have been going on. So I do think they're serious. I think one of the other issues, of course, it's been a lot of press and media speculation about is what would any force of UK or other nations, if they were prepared, and we are prepared to put people into Ukraine, what would that look like? And who would be involved in that, and who would contribute to the military, the military contribution. So I think this conversation today has been helpful. It's a continuation of the past, but we do need to keep a very clear eyes on this. As I said earlier, I don't think Russia in any sense is about to pull back from what it's currently doing. And it's very difficult to see Ukraine doing anything other than being able to hold ground to a lesser or greater extent, rather than retaking the territory that's lost over the last 3 years.
And it's interesting that Steve Witkoff has just landed in St. Petersburg. I'm sure he'll be, we haven't had it confirmed that he'll meet with President Putin, but it wouldn't be surprised if he does. What do you think is going on between the sort of American and Russian diplomacy? Because when we were last talking about Ukraine before the sort of tariffs mayhem happened, there was a feeling that Russia and America were talking in terms of almost kind of dividing bits of Ukraine up between themselves in terms of the spoils of Ukraine. How urgent do you think how much do you think America does want to get this deal done with Russia?
Well, I think to be fair to President Trump, if one wants to be fair to President Trump in the current circumstances, I do think he genuinely doesn't like war. He wants to see peace. But there is an element. I still have this sense that you touched on, an element of two great powers poring over a map, saying, "Well, we'll draw a line here. You can have this bit, and we'll take these materials," and so on and so forth. There's definitely an element of that. But I just can't see that. There's going to be any ceasefire agreement coming out of this in the near future. That they will continue to have talks, and I think that Russia will be prepared to continue to have conversations and will make the right sort of mood music. But there is absolutely no pressure on them really to bring about any sort of ceasefire at the moment. I mean, anything can happen, and I may be wrong. Maybe something will appear in the short term, but I just doubt it. I think President Trump is beginning to realize that he's, in terms of, I have to say, not just President Putin, but also in terms of China and President Xi, that these guys are not prepared to roll over simply because President Trump thinks something is a good idea. This is a big, serious issue for Russia. Whether we like it much or not, they genuinely believe that, all that they're doing in Ukraine is right, and they're not going to walk away from it. So I think these talks are important, but I can't see them making an awful lot of progress very quickly.
And given, look, this is just something else. This is just a thought that I've had, and it may well be completely bonkers, but I just wanted to put it to you. Is there any way of linking? Do the tariffs link to what's happening in Ukraine? Do you think there could be any thinking in Donald Trump's mind that if he puts the squeeze on people's economies through these tariffs, then that will force people to to maybe not be able to fund the Ukraine conflict, and that could maybe kind of expedite the end of the Ukrainian conflict, it potentially, in a way which is advantageous to America.
Yeah, well, anything's possible, but I and I don't want to be, clever about it. At the end of the day, I don't know any more than anybody else what's in Trump's mind, but I just don't see him joining up those dots in that way. Of course, the sanctions that he's announced are not, he's not added to the sanctions against Russia in these various announcements he's made over the last few days. It is going to put pressure on people's economy. There's no doubt about that. And going back to our $4.5 billion. The Chancellor is pretty pressed already to fill the gaps that she needs to fill.
Yes, so, the government's about to cut welfare, and
exactly.
People having to pay more in tax. So yeah, people are feeling the squeeze.
Yeah, so it will have a squeeze, but I don't know. My instinct is that it's not something that Trump has sat down with his team and said, okay, if we do this and this and this, this could be the outcome. I think he's doing these things in silos. And I don't think it's particularly joined up thinking. I mean, clearly I carry the baggage like everybody else of not approving of most of what he's getting up to. So maybe I'm being a bit unfair.
And final question. I mean, it is interesting that sort of, these talks between Steve Witkoff and Russia, and as we know, as we were saying earlier, Russia and China have a close relationship. I wonder if the trade tariffs will come up in talks. I wonder what the Russians will think about the trade tariffs and the trade war between America and China. Do you think they might make any sort of representations to calm everything down, or do you think Russia benefits from this kind of world chaos?
Well, I think that's the last point is where I would come from. I think Russia does see this as, a benefit to them, but also in their relationship with China and so forth, they would want to be supportive of China. I think, like a lot of people, they think that China could come out of this quite well, actually, and that we shouldn't forget that we sit here in Western civilization, in free capitalist democracies and so forth, but the vast majority of people in the world, or a majority of people in the world, don't live under the sort of regimes that we live under. They live under, terrible regimes like Putin, like Xi, like others, and those guys want to see the West implode. And all that Trump is doing in terms of all of this work that he's up to is destroying trust and breaking apart old alliances and making a lot of allies think twice about how far they can go along with what America's going up to. I think some of that is overplayed, if I'm honest, and I have quite a lot of contacts in the US who are determined that they will not allow these relationships to fail. But nonetheless, I think from a Russian point of view, all that is happening, Trump is up to, is good news. In simple terms, and they will be, delighted that the West and the countries that see the West as their allies are suffering.
Yes, I suspect you're absolutely right on that. Well, look, Tim, great to catch up with you. Thanks very much for your time. That's Major General Tim Cross. A couple of messages coming in. James says, why would China try and push Russia to peace? China is enriched by trade to Russia related to the war, and a weakened Russia helps China. Parts of Russia are historically China. And Dale says, the thoughts on a connection between tariffs and China in relation to Ukraine is an interesting one, but why put tariffs on the EU member states, most of which need to increase funds to support Ukraine? Dale, I suppose my argument would be if Trump just wants to get this done, and if Trump is quite happy to just do a deal with Russia where basically Russia gets kind of what it wants, and then America gets what it wants in terms of the minerals, the way to sort of hasten that is to run down the support that EU countries can provide, hence, wrecking their economies with tariffs. I mean, that's just a thought. That is just a thought.